You never forget the moment your entire world fractures, not with a scream, but with silence. It was a humid Thursday night in Charleston, South Carolina, and the air hung thick with secrets. At the Lawson family dinner table, everything looked picture perfect. White candles flickered in polished crystal holders. Steak plates sat untouched. But what made the scene unbearable wasn't the elegance. It was the complete and intentional absence of reaction. 32-year-old Charlotte Lawson, a newly promoted FBI agent specializing in nonprofit financial crimes, sat with a pounding heart as she faced her mother, Eleanor Lawson, an iconic philanthropist known for her sharp wit, impeccable posture, and cold precision. On paper, Eleanor was the heart of the Lawson Foundation, a charity celebrated for funding hospitals and school programs across the Southeast. But Charlotte knew better. Just hours earlier, Charlotte had filed an official report against Officer Gerald Miles, a long-trusted police captain and close friend of the Lawsons, for accepting a bribe during a weapons sting. Charlotte had caught him red-handed with a fat envelope tucked into his coat, all caught on her body cam. She thought her family would applaud her for standing up for justice. Instead, Eleanor sipped her Merlot like it was any other Thursday and said, "You've embarrassed this family." Charlotte's younger sister, Isabel, 29, a rising political star and media darling, wouldn't even meet her eyes. She pushed her salad around like a bored child in church. "You're overreacting," Charlotte said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is what I'm trained to do." "What you're trained to do," Eleanor snapped, "is follow protocol. Gerald Miles is not the enemy. He's part of the ecosystem that keeps this town together." Charlotte stared in disbelief. "You mean the ecosystem built on silence and payoff?" There was no yelling, just a slow clink of cutlery and Eleanor's final words that would alter the course of Charlotte's life. "Recant the report, or you walk away from this family. Your choice." She chose exile. That night, Charlotte packed a single suitcase. No dramatic exit, no pleading, no hugs. The next morning, she boarded a bus to Nashville, where no one knew her last name. And for 10 long years, silence reigned. She built a life without them, rising steadily through the FBI ranks, abandoning the name Lawson like a worn-out coat, going only by Charlotte Lewis. She worked tirelessly, especially on cases where charities were used as laundering fronts for criminal empires. She knew how they worked. She had lived in the house that built them. Then came the email. Subject: urgent. We need to talk. Sender: Marcus Hale. Marcus was the no-nonsense head of the FBI's Criminal Finance Division, a man known for exposing cartel money pipelines in NGOs. Charlotte had met him once in D.C., a conversation over coffee where he'd told her, "You have the instincts of someone who's lived through the lie." The message read, "Charlotte, we've flagged a weapons trafficking network using US-based charities. One of the key nodes is a foundation out of Charleston. It's the Lawson Foundation." Her blood froze. She hadn't heard the name aloud in a decade, but something told her it would find her again. Truth always does. Charlotte didn't reply immediately. She stared at the screen, heart racing. Then her phone rang. It was Marcus. "Charlotte, we need someone who knows that terrain. You know how they hide. You know how they speak. You know the players." "I walked away from that world," she said quietly. Marcus paused. "Maybe, but I don't think it walked away from you." The next day, she was on a plane. Charleston hadn't changed much. The pastel row houses, the cobblestone streets, the familiar way the air clung to her skin like guilt. But Charlotte had changed. Her posture was sharper, her eyes colder. Her badge no longer asked permission, it commanded it. Her first stop was a charity gala hosted by the Lawson Foundation. She was there under the cover of a financial compliance officer, hair swept back, dark blazer, a federal clearance badge tucked subtly into her purse. From across the ballroom, she spotted her mother standing at a podium under a velvet banner that read, "Integrity through service." Charlotte almost laughed. Eleanor looked the same, graceful, poised, and terrifyingly composed. Their eyes met for half a second. Eleanor's smile didn't break, but her gaze narrowed, cold as glass. Behind her, a slideshow played, showcasing a new logistics partnership between the Lawson Foundation and a company called Atlas Reach, a name Charlotte had seen before. She'd flagged it in a closed case involving shell organizations used by a Latin American arms syndicate. That night, Charlotte dug into the Foundation's shipping logs. What she found was damning. Crates labeled as medical supplies being sent through a Charleston port to an aid site in Arizona that didn't exist. One shipment had been signed off by Lawson, her sister. It wasn't just a one-off deal. This was systemic, intentional, personal. For Charlotte, the past had not only returned, it had weaponized itself under her mother's banner. Charlotte had always believed that truth was a slow burn, but this was gasoline. The night after the gala, she sat alone in a temporary office borrowed from the Charleston FBI field unit. On the desk was a beige manila folder labeled Atlas Reach Flagged Assets. Inside, the paper trail came alive: donation ledgers, falsified invoices, and shipments of community health equipment, with no clear destination or receipts of arrival. The shipments didn't go to hospitals or schools. They went to dormant warehouses near Charleston's industrial docks. The signature on the release forms? Isabel Lawson. That name echoed like a ghost in Charlotte's chest. She remembered the sister who once braided her hair before school, who snuck cookies into her lunchbox, who stood with her the night their dog was put down. That girl was long gone. Now, Isabel was the face of reform in South Carolina, often quoted in newspapers, praised for her outreach, featured in glossy political magazine spreads. She was being groomed for Congress. And here she was, rubber-stamping ghost shipments tied to a charity Charlotte had once believed in. Charlotte stared at the screen, her jaw tight. It was one thing to be disowned by her family. It was another to find out they'd been laundering money, and possibly weapons, under the cover of philanthropy. She needed proof, real proof. 2 nights later, she parked half a block away from an unregistered warehouse listed in the logs. At exactly 12:47 a.m., Isabel's sleek silver Range Rover pulled into the gravel lot. No headlights, no hesitation. Charlotte stayed in the shadows, perched behind a rusted shipping container, her phone already recording. A tall man in a dark military-style jacket emerged from the warehouse. The two exchanged words Charlotte couldn't hear. Then, an envelope, thick, handed to Isabel without ceremony. Charlotte's stomach dropped. She had enough field experience to know what this meant. It wasn't a donation. It was a payoff. She zoomed in. The man's jacket bore a faint patch. Orion Private Logistics. Her fingers tightened around her phone. That name had come up in a prior investigation into misrouted foreign aid. But the case had gone cold. Until now. Back at her hotel, she reviewed the footage frame by frame. Each detail layered another nail into the coffin of denial. The next morning, she sent Isabel a message. Coffee. Main Street Cafe. Just us. Don't bring your campaign manager. To her surprise, Isabel showed up. 20 minutes late. Impeccably dressed. Designer handbag. Immaculate blowout. But the moment she saw Charlotte at the table, her expression flickered. This wasn't a reunion. This was a confrontation. Charlotte placed her phone on the table, screen facing upward. It displayed a still image, Isabel's hand holding the envelope. Do you want to explain this? Charlotte asked. Isabel's eyes didn't waver. She reached for her coffee cup, took a slow sip, then said, You always thought being right made you better. Charlotte leaned in. You're laundering money for a shell company with ties to arms deals. That's not politics, Isabel. That's criminal conspiracy. Budget allocation, Isabel replied coolly, fully audited, nothing illegal. Her tone was perfect, precise, unflinching. But Charlotte noticed something she hadn't expected. Isabel's fingers trembled slightly as she set down her cup. She was scared. That night, as Charlotte reviewed her notes, her burner phone buzzed. One message. No number, no name. Just a warning. Stop now. This is your last chance. The old her, the daughter, the officer, the one who once believed family meant safety, would have hesitated. Not anymore. Charlotte had learned that silence is its own kind of violence, and too many people hide behind its veil. She drove to the house where she grew up. It had been left vacant after her father's sudden death. Neighbors said it was being kept for memories, but to Charlotte, it was a mausoleum. Inside, the air was stale, furniture covered in white cloth. Time had yellowed the edges of every photo still hanging on the wall. But the basement, that was different. She remembered her father's workbench, the place where he used to repair broken radios and tinker with clocks. He called it his quiet space. Charlotte tapped on the old brick wall behind the bench. Something sounded hollow. She grabbed a crowbar and started peeling the bricks away. Behind them was a locked metal case. She turned the dial to her parents' anniversary, March 22nd, 1985. Click! Inside were files, old ledgers, personal notes in her father's handwriting, and a sealed letter addressed to her. Charlotte, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it. I tried to pull away from the deals. I told your mother I wouldn't let the foundation be used like this. But power doesn't forgive disobedience. They called it a heart attack. Maybe it was. Or maybe they just made it look like one. I'm sorry I wasn't braver. Tears welled in her eyes, not just for the man who raised her, but for the truth that had been buried under legacy and lies. That night, she stayed up decoding everything. One name came up repeatedly: Logan Pike, a man previously listed as a major donor to the Lawson Foundation. His name had been wiped from all public records after her father's death. But Charlotte found a trail, an alias, a patient intake form at a mental health clinic outside Savannah. Admitted under the name Wendell Gray. She drove there the next morning. The facility was quiet, the kind of place where people are tucked away and forgotten. She introduced herself to the staff, flashed her badge, and asked to speak with Mr. Gray. An orderly led her to a small room with a view of the garden. An older man sat by the window, gray-haired, distant. Mr. Pike, Charlotte said softly, I think you knew my father. His eyes flicked to hers. Recognition bloomed. I told him to leave while he still could, he whispered. She placed the letter in his lap. He didn't read it, just nodded. Then, from a hidden pouch sewn into his robe, he pulled out a USB drive. This is everything, he said. They used the foundation, built a network, 7 cities. One message: loyalty is survival. Your mother, she's not just a figurehead. She's the architect. Charlotte thanked him and left. Back at her motel, she plugged in the USB and opened the files. Encrypted, but one folder had a voice recording. It was Isabel, her voice low, hurried. The next shipment leaves Tuesday. Dock 4. I've signed the papers. Just make sure no one checks the manifest. Charlotte stared at the screen, her hands steady, her heart anything but. Charlotte had seen dirty money before. She'd traced nonprofit funding to shell companies in Eastern Europe, busted aid scams tied to real estate fronts, even once chased a trail that ended in a luxury dog spa in Monaco. But this was something different. The Lawson Foundation wasn't just corrupt, it was deliberate, efficient, practiced. And now it was personal. The USB from Logan Pike, now Wendell Gray, contained more than just Isabel's voice memo. Charlotte had forensics working on decrypting the remaining folders, but one set of logs stood out immediately, a document labeled Junction 7 Verified Nodes. It listed 7 cities across the country: Charleston, Savannah, Tallahassee, Baton Rouge, Houston, Phoenix, and San Diego. 7 distribution points, each with an affiliated nonprofit listed as a partner for humanitarian logistics. It wasn't a charity network. It was a pipeline. Charlotte met with Marcus Hale that morning at the FBI Regional Field Office. He was calm, gruff, always sipping terrible gas station coffee from a steel thermos with a dented lid. "What you've got here isn't just a leak," he said. "It's a national fault line." He laid a satellite image on the table, an overhead shot of a portside warehouse in Houston. Labeled as Bethesda Medical Relief, the facility hadn't had a single registered delivery since 2019. Yet money kept flowing. From Charleston, from the Lawson Foundation, from Eleanor. Marcus leaned in. "We think they're moving biomaterials, possibly dual-use components, things that can be sold as medical aid but used for chemical deployment." Charlotte's stomach turned. "And the Foundation's name makes it invisible." "Exactly." They decided on a plan. Step 1. Feed disinformation through controlled FBI channels. Let a rumor leak about a federal raid on Charleston's harbor in 5 days. Step 2. Track who moves what. When people panic, they make mistakes. Charlotte returned to her hotel and went through the rest of her father's documents. One name kept popping up: Orion Solutions, Inc., a Delaware-registered logistics company, minimal web presence, but linked through cross-referenced banking records to military contractors overseas. In one memo, Charlotte's father had written, "Eleanor calls Orion our steel vein. They move what needs to disappear." That night, Charlotte sat on the rooftop of the hotel, watching the Charleston skyline glow gold and red. Below the surface, that glow was powered by fear, debt, and legacy. The next morning, the bait worked. At 2:06 a.m., a white Atlas Reach truck pulled out from behind one of the flagged warehouses. Charlotte was already positioned in a borrowed FBI vehicle 2 blocks down, her dashboard camera rolling. She tailed the truck out of the city and onto a service road. Before she could blink, another vehicle, a black SUV, swerved from a hidden turnout and rammed her off the road. Tires screamed, gravel scattered. Her car spun into a drainage ditch, missing a telephone pole by inches. When the dust settled, both trucks were gone. She sat there, breathing hard, fists clenched around the wheel, staring out into the night. Her instincts screamed louder than the engine. This was a message, a warning. When she returned to her room hours later, there was a manila envelope shoved under the door. Inside, her old Charleston PD badge, scratched over with a red X. Beside it, a handwritten note. "Last warning, silence keeps you safe." But Charlotte had been silent for 10 years. She was done. The next day, she took the USB and evidence logs to the FBI Forensic Division in D.C. They cracked another encrypted folder. This one contained financial transfer maps. Offshore banks in the Cayman Islands, front accounts in Nevada. Several payments traced back to a consulting firm under the name Pine Ridge Group. Its board members? Isabel Lawson, Jonah Voss, and Eleanor Lawson. It wasn't just about bribes. They were profiting. She returned to Charleston, the archive warehouse for the Lawson Foundation, where decades of paper ledgers were stored, had just burned down in what firefighters described as an electrical incident. But Charlotte had worked too many arson scenes to believe in coincidence. Near the rubble, she found the melted casing of a remote detonator, military grade. Someone had torched the past. She tried calling Isabel. No answer. She drove to Isabel's home. The front door was ajar. Inside, her sister's phone smashed on the floor. Furniture overturned, curtains flapping in the wind from a broken window. No sign of forced entry, no blood, just absence. Someone had taken her. Charlotte stood in the center of the room, heart pounding, then reached for the last ping location of Isabel's phone. It had gone dark near a private marina used by the Foundation for outreach events. That name, Starlight, surfaced again. A ship. A former luxury yacht repurposed for private donor events. It had been docked in Charleston for a week. The Foundation had booked it for a Saturday night gala. Guest list sealed under security. Privacy. Charlotte pulled up the port manifest. 22 crates labeled as oxygen relief equipment were scheduled for late-night departure. She made a decision. She would board the Starlight. Alone. Saturday arrived cloaked in heat and humidity. The kind that made your skin feel like it remembered every decision you'd ever made. Charlotte stood before the Starlight docked in the private marina just east of downtown Charleston. Underneath her floor-length navy gown was a body-wired recorder, a thigh-holstered Sig Sauer P365, and an earcom linked to the FBI Rapid Response Unit waiting offshore in an unmarked vessel. The ship was enormous, an ex-luxury cruise liner now leased out for elite fundraisers. If there was ever a perfect cover for illicit trade under the banner of philanthropy, this was it. Charlotte moved up the gangplank like she belonged. Confident, aloof. At the top, security barely glanced at her fake ID. Charlotte Emerson, philanthropic consultant from D.C. The invitation had been forged by Bureau cyber agents just 48 hours earlier. She was in. Inside, the ballroom was awash in gold, gilded railings, chandeliers, waiters in white gloves carrying champagne. Smooth jazz played as Charleston's elite, politicians, donors, executives, mingled and murmured about property taxes and redevelopment initiatives. Charlotte scanned the room. She saw faces she hadn't expected. State senators, judges, even a federal procurement officer she'd once flagged for misuse of contracts. Everyone here had something to gain. She passed through the crowd like a ghost, heading for the service corridor near the kitchen. Down a narrow staircase, the music faded. The scent of floral perfume was replaced with oil, rust, and salt. Below deck, the opulence gave way to steel and silence. Charlotte navigated the dimly lit halls until she reached the cargo hold. Her communicator buzzed faintly, Marcus checking in. She whispered, "I've reached the lower deck," confirming presence. Inside the cargo bay, she found them. Crates marked with blue crosses labeled Emergency Medical Supply, Priority Relief. She cracked one open with a crowbar. Inside, canisters. At first glance, they looked like oxygen tanks, but Charlotte had seen the same models used in a Syrian war crimes case. These weren't relief tools, they were vessels, likely carrying aerosolized biochemicals or fuel for weapon systems. Footsteps echoed behind her. She ducked behind a column. Through the crack in the bulkhead door, she saw him, Jonah Voss, former logistics director at Orion Solutions, now an alleged consultant to Atlas Reach. He was flanked by two armed men, tactical gear, military bearing. Charlotte hit record on her device. Jonah spoke into a satellite phone, calm and efficient. "Charleston wraps tonight. Arizona launches in 45 days. Everything's running through the Lawson Foundation nodes. Not a single red flag. No leaks. Eleanor said the oversight committees are blind." Charlotte's breath caught. She had what she needed. Then came the voice behind her. "I knew you'd come tonight." She turned. At the base of the stairs stood Eleanor Lawson, dressed in a silver gown like she owned the ocean. Her eyes were sharp. Her posture unbothered. "You've always been predictable, Charlotte. It's your most dangerous trait." Charlotte didn't flinch. "This ends tonight." "It does," Eleanor agreed, stepping forward. "But not how you think. You're too late. Even if you scream from the rooftops, the country doesn't care. You think headlines change systems? No. Only legacy does. And I've built one stronger than yours." Charlotte said nothing. Another figure appeared behind Eleanor, Isabel. Her gown was torn, her left eye swollen, but she was walking. In her hand, a small device. "I got out," she whispered, barely audible. "I can shut down the cargo bay hydraulics. It'll seal the hold." "Do it," Charlotte said. "Only if you promise." Isabel paused, breath hitching. "Promise they don't treat her like a common criminal." She's still our mother." Charlotte nodded, voice soft. "I promise we treat her like a citizen. No more, no less." Isabel pressed the button. Alarms blared. From the deck above, boots thundered. Tactical teams swarmed in, zip ties snapping, orders shouted. In the ballroom, panic spread as the walls of illusion crumbled. Jonah tried to run. An agent tackled him near the champagne bar. Several of his men fired off rounds before being disarmed. One officer took a bullet to the leg, non-fatal. The guests screamed, chaos flooding the golden halls. In the midst of it all, Eleanor Lawson reached beneath her gown. A pistol. She raised it toward Charlotte. Time slowed. Isabel screamed. Agents dove. But Charlotte didn't move. Because Isabel stepped into the line of fire. No! The shot never landed. Agents tackled Eleanor, wrenching the weapon from her hands. Charlotte ran to her sister who had collapsed. Not from a wound, but from the sheer terror of the moment. They held each other in silence. Not as rivals. Not as agents of opposing truths. As sisters. For the first time in 10 years. The Starlight was locked down within 20 minutes. Tactical teams swept every deck. 14 arrests were made on site. 23 containers seized, each labeled as humanitarian aid, each hiding components used in advanced weapon systems. Every box was photographed, scanned, and documented. The fallout was swift. Jonah Voss tried to negotiate within hours. Names, maps, shipping schedules, promises of bigger fish if they spared him a long sentence. Marcus Hale met him in the holding room, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "There's no deal," he said flatly. "You sold out your country. There's no bargaining your way out of that." Jonah's shoulders slumped like a man who realized he was no longer in control of the boardroom or the battlefield. Upstairs, Charlotte escorted Isabel to the medical bay. Her sister hadn't stopped shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off, and what remained was the echo of betrayal and buried guilt. "You think they'll hate me?" Isabel asked quietly. Charlotte sat beside her, exhaling slowly. "The truth doesn't come with applause, but hiding from it doesn't keep you safe either." It was the first real thing they'd said to each other in years. Isabel nodded, then reached into her clutch and handed Charlotte a small brass key. "I kept it in a deposit box, all the final access credentials, the ones they thought I'd deleted." Charlotte held it like a relic, proof that, despite everything, redemption was still possible. Back in Washington, the FBI's Data Analysis Division decrypted the final folders from Victor Pike's drive. The information was staggering. Offshore accounts, real estate holdings, political campaign contributions, all traced to charities embedded in 7 cities, each one using nearly identical patterns. One folder contained a video, grainy, likely taken by a hidden camera in a private boardroom. Jonah Voss and a clean-shaven man in a gray suit discussed their expansion strategy. "We use the nonprofits as anchors," Jonah said. "Each one buys political goodwill. A library here, a park there, a medical wing. And while they shake hands in public, we move product under the radar." "And the oversight?" the other man asked. Jonah laughed. "Eleanor handles that. Nobody questions a woman who hands out scholarships. She's untouchable." Charlotte watched the footage 3 times. Her hands didn't tremble. Her focus didn't blur. This was it. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about pulling the curtain down, for everyone to see what power looked like when no one was looking. 2 days later, she stood behind a podium at the National Press Briefing Room in D.C. Flags flanked her sides. Cameras clicked. The seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation gleamed behind her. She wore her badge, her real name, her truth. "My name is Charlotte Lawson," she began, "and I'm here to tell you what happens when institutions become weapons, when the people we trust with the public good turn that trust into a business model for silence." She laid it out piece by piece. The charity front, the funding pipeline, the 7-city network, the laundering, and the names. She didn't flinch when she said them aloud. Jonah Voss, 2 state senators, 1 judge, and Eleanor Lawson. There was a beat of stunned silence in the room. Then the floodgates opened. Questions, microphones, raised hands, breaking news chyrons. But Charlotte had said what needed to be said. She walked off stage without answering a single question. That night, she returned to her office. A sealed folder was waiting on her desk, marked White House Correspondence. Inside, a formal recommendation. President's request for appointment consideration. Director of the FBI. She sat with it in silence. The irony wasn't lost on her. A decade ago, she was the daughter erased from the family photo. Now she was being asked to lead the very institution they once taught her to avoid. She didn't accept it right away. Instead, she flew back to Charleston one final time. A community town hall was being held in the wake of the scandal. She didn't go to speak. She went to listen. Some citizens were furious. Others wept. But most just wanted the truth. Afterward, an elderly man approached her. Plaid jacket, worn cap, slow steps. He handed her an envelope, said nothing, and walked away. Inside was her original FBI badge, the one she had turned in when she left law enforcement 10 years ago. Taped to the back was a single note in clean black ink. "You're not done, Charlotte. This is just the beginning." She looked up at the courthouse across the street, its stone facade cracked by time, yet still standing. This was never about vindication. It was about making sure no one ever had to lose their family to corruption dressed as charity again. 1 year after the Starlight operation, the president signed the appointment papers. Printed at the top, Charlotte May Lawson, Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The ceremony was private but meaningful. Held in the grand atrium of FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., surrounded by rows of agents, cabinet secretaries, and members of both parties. Even the press had been kept at arm's length, for now. As Charlotte stood behind the podium, reciting the oath of office, she saw two familiar figures in the last row, her mother and her sister. Eleanor Lawson wore no expression, not pride, not shame, just the icy stillness of someone who had built empires on control and was now watching them slip away. Isabel sat beside her, tearful, quiet, changed. Charlotte raised her right hand and said the words, "I do solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic." The crowd erupted in applause, but to Charlotte the words still hung in her chest like thunder. She hadn't reached the summit. She'd reached a new front line. Back in her office on the top floor, the view stretched out across the Capitol, marble monuments, snaking rivers, and the maze of glass buildings that shaped American policy. It wasn't awe she felt. It was responsibility. Moments later, Marcus Hale entered her office with a sealed folder. "This came from Langley," he said, encrypted. "Level 6 clearance." Charlotte opened it, her eyes scanning the contents quickly. Her blood ran cold. Orion Solutions, the logistics shell that had worked with the Lawson Foundation, had connections to several flagged intelligence breaches overseas. Through partnerships with humanitarian efforts in Eastern Europe, they'd embedded agents into aid convoys, wired money through Swiss charities, and even procured tech contracts for surveillance. But what hit harder was a single memo. Asset tag, Charlotte Lawson, flagged as Threat Tier 2. Someone at the highest level of another government, or even within the U.S., had marked her. Not for elimination, but for containment. They saw her as a disruption to the infrastructure of silence. For the first time since her return to Charleston, Charlotte sat in stillness and just processed. She wasn't the girl who left in a borrowed car with a suitcase and a broken heart. She wasn't the rookie agent chasing promotions or parental approval. She was the woman who pulled back the curtain and stayed standing. That evening, as her security detail swept her office and encrypted lines were rerouted, she pulled out her original FBI badge, the one a stranger had returned to her in Charleston. It was scratched. The metal dull, but it still carried weight. The real kind. Justice, she realized, isn't a singular act of exposure. It's the act of waking up every day and choosing to stay in the fight, even when the headlines fade. Even when your name is a whisper in back rooms. Even when the people closest to you once turned away. She looked at the board behind her desk. 7 cities had already been mapped, each marked with red thread and paper clippings. But now there were 13. A new cluster in Oregon, another node in Miami, a suspicious nonprofit funneling donations from Brussels. The network hadn't been defeated. It had simply adapted. Charlotte stepped back and stared at the map. Then she picked up a marker and drew one word beneath it. Next. We live in a time when truth can be buried under philanthropy, where corruption doesn't kick in doors. It hosts dinners, smiles for cameras, and donates to scholarship funds. What Charlotte Lawson's story teaches us is this: justice isn't loud, it doesn't always feel like victory, and it never, ever comes easy. But it matters, because silence dressed up as legacy is still betrayal. If you've ever been the one to speak up, to walk alone, to risk being called disloyal for being honest, this story was for you. If this story hit home, let us know. Comment below, tell us where you're watching from, or just type, "Still watching, still fighting." Your comment might be small, but it tells us this truth matters. And if you believe that legacy shouldn't come at the cost of integrity, thank you for listening.